Hello and welcome to this tutorial on how to set up a Linux SSH user using SSH keys instead of a password. And what I'm going to use for this tutorial is my MySQL sandbox that I've set up. And we're not going to use anything MySQL in this tutorial, but it's a really nice, easy way to set up some VMs pretty quickly. So you can just go to downflannery/MySQL sandbox at github.com. and it's freely available to use. And if you go into the wiki here, there's lots of pages on how to get started on Linux or a Mac and how to use the sandbox, as well as Windows and what software is required for this to use it. Also under the MySQL courses here, if you click on this MySQL developer querying for data course that I've created on Udemy, within this course, there's actually these sections on how to set up the sandbox on Mac or Windows, and these are freely available as preview without actually having to buy the course to view them, although I'd certainly appreciate it if you bought the course. And there's also more tutorials here on Linux that I've created so far as well. But once you get the sandbox all set up, it's pretty simple. And so right now here I'm in my sandbox checkout, and the key thing here is be where this Vagrant file is, and we're going to do Vagrant up db1 and start up the db1 VM. We're also going to start up db2 as well, and the reason for that is what we're going to be doing here is setting up a new user on these two hosts that is unable to log in using a password, so you need to have a key. But you don't want to take that private key and put it on different servers so you can get from db1 to db2. Let's say you have to copy a backup file from one server to the next. You wouldn't want to have to first copy that down to your local host and then copy it back up to a different server. So I'm going to be showing you how you can go from your host machine and having your private key on your host machine do a pass through on it when going into different servers, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But first we need to get the servers up and running here. And so what I did here, db1 was done, so now I did a Vagrant up db2, as you can see right here. So now I'm just waiting on db2 to get up and running. All right, so now we've got db1 and db2 up and running. And within Vagrant, you can see this by doing a Vagrant global status here. So you'll see we got db1 and db2 up and running. And we're going to do Vagrant SSH db1. And you want to be in that same sandbox file, or in the sandbox where that Vagrant file is, to be able to do this command. And I'm obviously doing this on a Mac. Things are a little bit different on Windows. So now we're in the db1. And so the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to sudo su to become root. And we can confirm that by running the whoami command with no spaces, and it says root. You can also tell that you're root by the hash sign here. And so what we need to do is we just need to create a user to play around with this. So we're going to do user add test user. And if we look at the home directory, you'll see that we do have a home directory for the test user now. And for demonstration purposes, let's set a password for test user. So it needs to be a complex password of at least 8 characters. I'm just setting a password that I can remember. Like I said, this is just to demonstrate, because we're actually going to lock it so there is no password, but I want to show you first that we can actually initially log in until we do the lock. So now we've got a test user and I've got a password set for that user. So in a different tab, we're going to actually, rather than doing a Vagrant SSH, what we're going to do is we're going to do a normal SSH in here. So going into the Vagrant file, you can get the host IP address of DB1, which is this that ends in .103. So if we do test user at the IP address, and then just enter whatever password you set up. So now you can see I am logged in on DB1 as test user. Now, what we want to do though is we want to lock that so that we can't do that. So we cannot log in like in the manner we just did. And the way you do that, and so now I'm back over in this tab where I'm root on DB1. We're going to do password dash lowercase l and the username. And what that's going to do is that's going to lock that user. So now if I try to log in using a password, it's not going to allow it. Permission denied. So now I can no longer use that same password that I set up to actually SSH in as a test user on that host machine. And the only user that can do that, and actually here I'll show you how to unlock it, which is just a lowercase u. So now we've unlocked it. And so now I should be able to, if I can type my password correctly again. So now I can log in. And you can actually see that there was one failed login attempt since the last successful one. So now back over here on DB1, what I want to show you is let's lock it again. So we're root. Now if we, let me go back to being root. So I'm going to switch to being the test user. Let me bring that up here. So now I'm the test user on DB1, and I did that a little quick. So what I did, let me exit back out. So now I'm root again. So if I go, who am I? You can see I'm root. And as root, what I did, because root can switch to being a different user, I did switch user, so SU, test user. And so now I'm the test user. And so now let's pretend I'm logged in directly as the test user. As the test user, I can't do the unlock. Only root can do that. So if you, as the root user on a server, lock somebody so they can't log in as their password, as long as they're not in the wheel group, meaning they can't sudo and become root themselves to do it, to undo it, they won't be able to undo this. So they'll still have to be using their SSH keys to log in. So far now we've got a user set up and locked on DB1. And next what we're going to look at is how to actually set up the keys. So the next thing we need to do is we need to actually go and create our SSH key pair, which would include our private and our public key pair. So what I'm going to do here, let me clear that, is I've created on my Mac here, I've created a keys directory. Now, normally you're going to put this in the default .ssh directory in your home directory, but I'm going to show you if you have it in a different location, which would also work if you name the key differently if you have multiple keys in your home directory on how to do that. So we're going to create this, I'm going to put this in this keys directory here. So to create our key, what we're going to do is we're going to use the SSH keygen tool, pass the flag -t and RSA, which is going to give us our type of encryption. And so here, this is where it's saying enter the file where you want to save this key pair. And this is normally where you'd want to save it. So you could just hit enter But if you had it with a different, if you wanted to name it something different, let's say you have lots of different keys for multiple different types of servers you got to log into, then you would want to do that, and you could do that here by giving it this path and then just changing this name to something else. By default, though, when you log in, it's going to look for this and this naming convention in this directory. But I'm going to show you how to pass in a different one. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do this as tutorial. And so what I'm doing here is I'm saying in the present directory, call it tutorial. And then I'm going to hit enter. Oops, I already have one there, so I'm going to overwrite. And I'm going to just create a password to put on this. So this is the password I'll have to enter when I log in. So let's see here. Let me remove test ones. So now I've got these tutorial ones, and let me just make sure these are for today, and they were. So this tutorial here, this is the private key. So this is the one that you want to keep very, very secret. Keep it on your local machine. It should be locked down to where you're the only one that can read it, and that should be, if you put it in that .ssh directory, you want to make sure it works that way too. This public one is the one we need to put on the server. So back over here to DB1, let me log out here. Oops. Actually, I do want to be root because I want to switch user to test user. And I'm going to CD to go to the home directory. And so now I'm in that home directory. So I want to create a directory called .ssh. And then I want to change the permissions on that directory to be 700. And then CD into that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a file called authorized keys. And hit I to go into insert mode. And then here I'm going to just do less on the tutorial public key. And I'm just going to copy this entire key like so over here. And I'm just going to paste it in this file. And then what we're going to do is we're going to lock this file down now. So change mod 600 on authorized keys. Let's just look at those permissions. So this way, nobody but test user or root user would be able to look at this public key. So now, if we go over here, all right, now we're going to test actually SSHing into the DB1 box using that key. So if we type SSH-I, which will tell us this will be the path to our private key. So it's tutorial, the non-public one. And then we just do test user at the IP address. After that, and you know that it's asking for the key password versus the standard password because it says enter passphrase for key like this. If you don't see this, if it looks like you're just asking for a password, just for an example, let me see if this will work. Oops. 11.1.104, so this would be 4. Oops. So we haven't set up the test user on DB2 yet. So here, it's asking for a password, even though this user doesn't exist there. If you see it asking for a password like this, that is asking for the user password, not using the key. So something was done wrong. If it looks like this, then it's the password for the key. So I entered my key, and now I'm able to log in to DB1 as test user. So the next thing we got to do here is we have to, I'm just going to Control C out of that. We want to go through and get the DB2 server set up with the test user and its key as well. So we're just going to run through this real quick. It'll be the exact same steps basically that we did before. So we go Vagrant, SSH, DB2, and we're going to do sudo su dash become root. We're going to add the user, test user, and then we're going to lock the test user from password, and then switch user to test user, cd to get to their home directory, make their SSH, chmod 700.ssh, cd.ssh, vim. Let's create the authorized keys. And let's go back over here. Oops, gotta get out of DB1 there. Let's get whatever our key is. And now we should be able to do the same thing that we did before, but instead of .103, .104. And if everything works correctly here, and it didn't, forgot to set the permissions on authorized keys for one. Let's see if that's why it's not letting us do this. There we go. So you saw, I noticed right away here that this was asking me for a, Linux password, not a SSH key password. So if you see that, something's wrong. And what was wrong there was for authorized keys to work, it had to have limited permissions. And so the setting it to 600 for just the user seemed to work. So now it's asking for my SS key password, and it worked. So now we have DB2 set up. So in this final part, what we're going to look at is we're going to look at SSH key forwarding. So right now I'm in that directory where I have my keys or my key. And so the first thing I'm going to do is do SSH agent bash. And as you can see, that actually changed my prompt. And then I'm going to do SSH add my key, and it's going to ask for my passphrase that I put on my key. And as you can see, now it says identity added. And now when I SSH into DB1, I'm going to do it slightly different, where it's going to be SSH dash big A, so capital A, and then just the normal IP address to log in. And now I'm in DB1, and as you can see, it didn't ask for my passphrase because it had already done so when I added my identity for SSH forwarding. So now that I'm in DB1 here, as you can see right here, if I needed to SSH or copy or whatever across to DB2, and I'm going to show that just by SSHing into it, but like secure copy would work the same way. And so if I SSH in as test user at, I don't want to do 104. Now what you can see is now I've actually SSH'd from DB1 into DB2, rather than doing something sloppy where you might be tempted to copy your private key from your local machine up to DB1 to be able to do this. With SSH key forwarding, it's a more secure way of doing what you need to do. And as a DBA, it's very common to be copying, things like backups from one server to the next. And like I said earlier, you don't want to have to copy those down to your local host and then copy those up. That'll just take more time and network resources. So that is SSH. How to set up SSH keys, as well as locking down users so they can't use a password, and then using SSH key forwarding. to be able to be successful in